this month we're doing the series on top things, or basically the 3 top things that Jesus wants us to know. And we actually had the 4th one last week, which was with Stephen Downey about prayer, that we really need to be in prayer. So today, though, we're going to be looking at Kingdom Eyesight. Jesus wants us to have Kingdom Eyesight, to look at things from the point of view of God, not just how little things affect us. As I said, we know about missionaries overseas in other countries. We're part of that connected family, part of God's family, and therefore it is more than what we are here in this place. It's wider and greater and better than that. So let's have a bit of a recap. I got it right. The week before last we were looking at what the main thing that Jesus wants us to know is that we need to abide in him, that we need to be abiding in him to bear fruit. And he said, "This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples." So the thing that he wants us to know is that we are his disciples, and we are to show the world that we are his disciples. And we do that by bearing fruit. But we can only bear fruit by being part of that vine, by being part of the stock where he flows through us and reflects his love into the world. That's part of it. And then another thing that we're going to be looking at is seeing, where we need to seek his kingdom, to understand and realise we are talking about his kingdom. As we live in this world, it is this world, but we also need to be realising and understanding it's his kingdom that we are living for. And see, Jesus said this to his people, and that's from Luke chapter 12. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest?" Interesting what he's talking there. And one of the things that we need to do when we study the Bible is look at what's being repeated in a particular context, in a particular verse there. What's being repeated there? What is perhaps the only thing that's repeated in that section? What word? Worry. Worry. What's another one? Life. We have, do not worry about your life. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Why do you worry about the rest? So there's worry and life. Now the interesting thing is, as it tells us up there, we know and think about, don't worry about your life, what you'll eat or what you'll drink or what you'll wear. So Jesus is telling us right from the start, your life is me. Your life is me, is within me, is me. You abide in me. That's your life. So don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry about your life. Now, I find it quite funny that he talks about, consider the birds, they don't sow or reap. The disciples would have well known in those days that in order for them to gain food, they would have to grow the pasture, to raise the sheep or the goats, and to get the land and till it, sow it, and then reap the harvest. Work to live. But Jesus is saying there, the birds are taken care of. They don't go and dig up and do this and do that. They're taken care of. And your life, who you are, is more important, more valuable to God than the birds. It's a terrible thing to sort of say and look at it in that perspective. But Jesus is trying to make out, look, we worry about the little silly things in our life. We worry about the periphery. We get distracted from the real game, which is about life. And that life is abiding in Christ. So concentrate on that, what he says. And I find it quite humorous that Jesus says, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? What do the doctors tell us about if we worry and are over anxious? We shorten our life, coming from a nurse. You know, if worrying doesn't add anything to your life, why worry? It's so easy to read those words and to say them. The hard part is enacting it. The hard part is in understanding it. You know, as most of you know, I'm about to go into hospital in a couple of weeks' time or 10 days' time, and people saying to me, how are you? How are you coping? You're preparing for it and all. And I'm going, I don't feel anything wrong. I don't know of anything wrong. I'm no different. All I know is I'm going to go to hospital, I'm going to go to sleep, and I'm going to wake up, and I'm going to wake up sore, and I'm going to wake up sorry. That's when you should be worrying about me, is about how cranky I'm going to get. But in the meantime, life goes on. Nothing has changed or affected me. Well, that I know of. It's probably affected me because of whatever's wrong. But you get the point? But at times we can't help worrying because it's new. It's new territory. I still remember when the first man on the moon and he stepped out. I was thinking that I might have, if I was the astronaut, I probably would have got to the moon and jumped out. And then I suddenly realised, well, maybe I didn't, because I don't know what I'm jumping into. But if I was a young kid, I wouldn't have really worried about what I did. It's exciting, so I jump out and suffer the consequences later. But we can step out in life knowing no matter what we step out onto, it's going to be safe and sure ground. And if it's not, God's there protecting us. He tells us that a bird doesn't fall to earth without him knowing about it. His covering arms are there. We should know about it. So don't worry. Our life is important. Worrying does not add an hour to it. In fact, as was said, probably shortens it. And he goes, consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labour or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendour was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today, and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you? You of little faith. And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. A little bit of a lesson there for us. One of the great things before residential development sort of took over here in Tea Gardens was that just before every Christmas, and Carol and Bi could probably tell us this too, there were the Christmas bells, the Christmas flowers that would come out wild around Tea Gardens, and they were beautiful, they were magnificent. We don't see them as much these days, or maybe I don't see them because I'm not looking, but they were beautiful. Now, if I tried to plant them in my garden and get the array that's there, they'd be dead. I can't plant and grow anything But when you see these magnificent flowers that just seem to spring up without any sort of human intervention, is absolutely beautiful. We can go and look at the stuff that happens at Lake Eyre. Every now and then there's the floods come through, the waters come through, and then after a while of season, then something, all those flowers out there suddenly grow up, spurt up. Told you 2 weeks ago about all of a sudden this weed started appearing in our place. Sue said, "I just leave it, we'll pull it out later." Turns out to be a nectarine tree and with beautiful blossoms and everything else, and we finally had finished off the beautiful fruit last week. It's good. We didn't do it. God did it. He knows what we want. He knows how to look after. He knows how to make beauty. He knows how to allow us to enjoy life. But too often we're running around not understanding or appreciating what life really is all about. And life's all about abiding in Christ. And he goes on and says, don't set your heart on what you'll eat or drink. If the pagans run around all about that, and you think about it. We've got cooking shows now on how to make a sandwich. We've got, shows on how to have the best sort of drinks. And I was listening to radio in the car the other day, and there was a whole program getting people to ring out, what's your favourite cold Christmas drink, and whether you sprinkle it with mint or some other herb or whatever, or have a cup of tea mixed in with jasmine and then change round and coal, all that sort of thing. I mean, that's good, but they're there to sustain life, not for us to be worshipping. And sometimes we worship food and fashion without realising it. Now, I'm not saying, because, that we shouldn't be well dressed and make sure we have the right sort of food. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is get the perspective right. From God's view, food, fashion and decoration is not what's important. Sure, they're important to sustain life, but the important thing is life itself. The fact that we have life. The fact that our life is dependent on how we live in Jesus. That's what's important. Don't chase after, I've got to make sure I get... No, life needs to be sustained, but life needs to be reflecting that we are God's fruit, that we are God's disciple, that we are God's children. And he finishes off with this, and I found this quite intriguing. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. He's gone from worry and says, don't be afraid. Afraid. So we generally worry about the unknown, things that haven't happened. We worry and we become a bit afraid and we become timid. And Jesus is saying here, don't be afraid, little flock. John talks about previously, this is Luke writing here, but John would talk about little children. And it's interesting, I didn't quite get the understanding that little children that Jesus was meaning there, but remember when he said on the Sermon on the Mount, suffer the little children to come unto me? We are to be like little children dependent on their parents. We are to be like little children dependent on Jesus, dependent on God. And he talks about the little flock. A flock that is being looked after, that is being shepherded, that is being cared for. Don't be afraid. We've got the best shepherd looking after us. Don't be afraid. Value life. Non-Christians find it funny when we reflect Jesus. I'm going to tell you two stories of people in this church, and I'm sorry if I use their real names. But I was talking to Helen yesterday, and she was saying how that she's involved in a particular group, and not all of them believe in church or anything like that. And she happened to give away at Christmas time, not just a card, but a Gospel of John or something like that. After Christmas, the lady saw her and said, "Thanks for giving me that." I went and read it. I've now been reading the Bible and I've actually gone back to church. So, and if you asked her, "Helen, what were you doing?" And she'd say, "No, I was just being Helen." She was being what God had taught her to be, and she was living her life sustained on God, sustained in Jesus. And she was led to give this person this. And so that person's life's important to God. It ought to be important to us. It's not up to us to see how that life's going to turn out. That will be done by God. But our role is to love one another, to be shepherded with the flock. Had a phone call from a lady at Pendyma that I get regular phone calls at midnight from, quite upset and distressed from time to time. She rang up this time totally distressed. She had to go to some dental or medical appointment in Raymond Terrace. Was in a mess, didn't have a car, didn't know how to do it. And I rang John and Robin Croyle and said, "Are you able to help?" "Yeah, we'll go down and pick her up and take her down and bring her back," and all that. Turned out to be quite a lengthy time. And it was just that, and she did need sort of a bit of a nurse attention, and Robin was a bit of a nurse. We didn't know this at the time. It all worked out. She got driven back. They spent a few hours down there with her. That night, about midnight, she rang me up and she said, "Why did those people do that? Why did they go out of their way, didn't take any money, don't even live there, weren't even going down there, and they would do that? Is it because you told them?" I said, "No." I asked them would they be interested. They did it because they understand how important it is to care for people. That really upset her mind. She said, "How do I thank them?" I said, "Well, you've got to contact them and thank them, and maybe when you come along to church you can say hello to them again." I don't know how that's going to turn out. But Robin and John, to this lady, they were heroes. She couldn't believe that someone that she doesn't even know would do that for her. But you ask Robin and John, "Why'd you do that?" "Because Len told you." "No." "Because, well, why wouldn't you do it?" That's the love that God shows. That's the love that God shows. Someone's life is more important than the food or the petrol or the car or the fashion. That's what we've got to know and realise and understand. We have been given the kingdom. Expense or cost is not a deterrent for us because we are the richest people in the world. We've been given the kingdom. More than the keys to the kingdom, we've been given the kingdom. So that's why food and all those things aren't important, because the real riches are already ours. And the important thing is life. Life. And the two things, the week before last, Jesus said, "This is my command, love one another." And John was renowned. When there's a little bit of a squabble going on in the church, he'd say, "Little children, love one another." You know? Darryl was treading on Stuart's feet. Well, you know, I'm using them because it didn't happen, and as an example. What would John say to them? "Oh, well, look, did you mean to do that?" Or did you do? No, he'd just say, "Little children, love one another." So when there's things going wrong in the church, between people, because we're here because we love one another, we're here amongst friends. When that happens, we don't say, "Oh, well, who did this in this way and whose fault was this?" We just got to say to one another, love one another. Life is important. Not the food, not the shoes, not the treading on the toes, not this, not that. Love one another. Life is what's important. And the reason it's life that's important is that Jesus has told us, "Do not be afraid, little flock. Love each other, little children. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom." And why did Jesus tell us these things? "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world." You'll see this message again next week. That's the closing slide. I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And so, in closing, all I can say is, little children, love one another. Thanks, John.